I want to start with a little bit about NSU because, like Jeff said, most people, me included, until I researched it, I really didn't know a lot about NSU. And I'm going to try and use this technology properly. NSU was established in 1873 in Neckarsulm, a town in Germany, and they manufactured knitting machines. It was a pretty crude little thing, but that's what they started with way back then. Later, they made bicycles, and then their first motorbike in 1901. And this is a unicycle, and they made this in 1886. So this company, it goes back a long way in history. This is one of their first racing motorcycles, and it's a single cylinder. It's quite advanced for 1905. And then they also manufactured cars. This one is 1913, and they were primarily in rich people's cars, big fancy cars with big engines, and they really got big in that business. And here we have a lady in what they called a sports car in 1925, and they made quite a few cars that were kind of in the Cord and Duesenberg range. They also made a lot of limousines. They didn't call them that then, but they had a lot of windows and a lot of people could be in one car. And this is an engine from a model that they made from 1930 to 1935. And if any of you, I know David Pritchard, and I didn't see anybody else here that is familiar with Norton Manxes or Internationals, but the design is very similar because Walter Moore, who built the first overhead cam, designed the first Norton overhead cam single engines, thought that Norton didn't really appreciate him, and in 1928 he quit and moved to Germany and worked for NSU, and this engine really shows the Walter Moore influence on their designs pre-war. And of course in 1938, when things got hot with Hitler, he went home. So after the war, things changed. Besides that, the factory was bombed right out. They had to start from scratch. This is something I just learned a while ago, but in 1931, they hired Professor Porsche to design a car. And he designed this car, and in 1934, they built prototypes. And they announced that they were going to produce this little car. But the problem was that NSU has had financial difficulties in 1929 in the crash, and so they couldn't manufacture this Beetle because they were basically insolvent because they had just built a huge new factory to build big fancy cars, and there was no more demand after the worldwide crash in '29. So they sold the whole car business, lock, stock, and barrel, to Fiat with a promise not to make cars for a certain number of years. So that's why the Beetle was a Volkswagen and not an NSU, because it was actually designed by Mr. Porsche, who didn't have his own company back then, for NSU. In the mid-1950s, NSU had become the largest motorbike producer in the world, putting out 350,000 machines in 1955. I know BSA was the largest producer of motorcycles in the world for some years, but actually in the early 50s, NSU was the largest producer. Much of this, they made a lot of little bikes too. It wasn't all bigger motorcycles with NSU. They made NSU Quicklies. They made this during the war. This is called a Kettenkrad. And when the war was over, the Allied countries were so jealous of this military vehicle, and it was used by the Germans so effectively in Africa during the war. It could go through almost anything. They could mount a machine gun, or it could carry a bunch of people. It was very versatile, and it could go up the side of a riverbank or anywhere they had to go. And yet, it steered like a motorcycle in the front, but it was tracked in the back. So they produced these until 1948, after the war, to fill all the orders for reparations from the war. This is a 1951 four-cylinder supercharged motorcycle at NSU. It was actually not successful in road racing because it was too heavy for the tires and the rest of the chassis of the day. But I think it looks quite a bit like a Z1 Kawasaki, actually. You know, look at that engine, double overhead cam. And back then, like 1950, there was no MV Augusta or, like that. This was really forward thinking. But it was too cumbersome and heavy for the rest of the bike and the tires of the time. So what they did is they used it for world land speed record efforts, because the weight wasn't a big issue there. Once you get moving, it will pick it up over time, and you still get the higher top speed. But pretty forward design. This is a small picture that I got to make bigger. So I'm going to try. It's not going well. This is again a racing machine, but this is a different model. This has the camshafts driven overhead by two different shafts, and it's a real nice engine too. The 500 version of this produced 98 horsepower at 8,500 RPM, which for 1951 wasn't bad. They banned them after the war, 1951. They banned supercharging. But as long as it was able to be used, it was very competitive. And this is a bike. I had one of these, and it was pretty rough, and it was missing a few parts. But this is a 500 NSU console, 500 single. And I wish I had it back, but I wish I had all the bikes back, and I have Zaru. This bike actually went to Ireland with a veterinarian from Arbor that was a good friend of mine, and he moved back to Ireland, and he pleaded with me, and I sold him this, and I sold him a Zundap KS601 twin as well. So he came back and visited me. I hope he still has them. I didn't ask him. And this is 1953. Now, Walter Moore had gone back to England, and the new designer after the war was a man named Alfred Roeder. And this was one of his, it wasn't his first project, but it was early on. So this is a 1953 NSU Standard Max. And notice it doesn't have rear struts. This actually is a monoshock design. There's a spring and a hydraulic damper in the frame based on, and so this 1953, don't let anybody convince you they invented it in Japan in 1979. This is another 1954. This is their race engine. This is a 250 twin, and in 1954 this made 39 horsepower at 11,500 RPM. Again, you know, 1954 there was not very many, nothing much to compete with that. This is an NSU Sport Max, and NSU were the World Grand Prix champions in 1953, 54, and 55. And when they quit, they made approximately 36 of these to sell to privateers. And those people kept racing against the factories with those until the early 60s. And one of the riders who didn't have a job with the factory anymore when they quit in 55, he won the next year with this book. I'm sure his was hot rodded by the factory, but he won the Grand Prix World Championship again in 55 with this. I wish I had one. But the press steel frame and the forks and a lot of the basic engine is the same as a Supermax or a Standard Max. This is the land speed effort. They went at Bonneville, 1956, NSU went 339 kilometers per hour at Bonneville, South Platte. That translates into just over 211 miles an hour with a 500. And Triumph immediately set about trying to take that record, and they failed several times by not getting proper sanctioning and all the rest of that. And eventually they did go faster, but they used nitromethane fuel and a 650 engine. Some of the other records that NSU set with 125s and 250s, they lasted for years and years. No one beat that. Am I hearable?
Yes.
I can't tell.
Don't touch the table.
Oh, sorry. See, I need training. Oh, sorry. Yeah, here's the little brag sheet from the factory. My technology isn't working that good here. Yeah, those are the records that they set. And this was 1956. So actually, their 500 went faster than the Vincent Black Lightning did, but it was streamlined, and the Black Lightning was somebody with bare pants, so not fair. NSUs were no slouch when they were in competition. At one time, the factory had, I think it's 114 buildings in it. This is from 1956. But yeah, it was a pretty extensive organization, and they smelted their own iron. They made their own wheel rims. They bought very few products in. They had it was a huge business. And this is a picture out of a 1959 Northwest Cycle catalog. And there's the 125 Super Fox. And I remember Pete Weems in his little shop on Smith Street had one of these, and he treasured it. He had it in one of the sheds that he rented down the lane. If there's anybody else who remembers Pete Weems and his shop on Smith Street, I'd really like to talk to you afterwards, because yeah, there's history there that I need to dig into. And that Supermax is I actually got one of these. A friend of mine was up north doing electrical work, and he bought it in the paw and dragged it down to me. It needs a lot of work. It's a 56, but it came from Northwest Cycle, so it's one of the ones in that picture. And these are the little cars that this is called a Prince, and this is what NSU moved to when the motorcycle market started to collapse and people were looking for small cars. And the engine in this is basically two side-by-side cylinders from the Supermax joined together. It was 600 cc air cooled. Yeah, pretty good gas mileage, I think. My wife would still like one, but I don't think it's going to happen. Oh, this is a quickly. This bike, this belongs to a friend of mine here in Manitoba. This thing has stopped working, and the only way to make it work is to reboot it. That's an NSU quickly, and that's original paint. They made 986,000 of these. Yeah, and by the mid 50s, NSU had become the largest motorbike producer in the world, with it putting out 350,000 machines in 1955. Much of this can be attributed to Chief Engineer Albert Roeder. Yeah. They made I had no idea, and I don't think most people in Canada knew just how big NSU were in terms of production. The German goods were heavily tariffed after the war, so they were more expensive, and none of the NSU products were made cheaply. So, yeah, but it's amazing, really, when you look at it. And I'm going to stop with the history section now. I got to move on, but I kind of lost my timer here. I'm going to go to my own NSU story. I have this NSU. This is in my backyard. This is a 1954 Standard Max, and the reason I'm showing you the picture is that when I was about 15, Tiny Robbins kindly started hiring me to do some work around the shop, and he trusted me, and he gave me a key to the shop, and I could come on the weekends when there was nobody else there. And between Tiny Robbins' shop at 16 Keewatin Street and the next door neighbor, there was about a 2.5 foot space, and it was blocked off from the street, so you couldn't see what was in there from the front. But from the back, you could haul, and so that's where all the junk went that there was no room inside the shop for. And Northwest Cycle sold these bikes. I'm pretty sure it was them, and I don't think it was Pete Weems. And so one sunny Sunday afternoon, when there was nobody there and I had the key, I went down there and pulled the carcass of one of these that Northwest had sold for peanuts or given Tiny, because it had been in a front end collision and got badly smashed. And I'm such a curious George that I had to go there and take the engine out of it and take the top off and see what was in there. So when I saw what was in there, I was so impressed. I put it all back together properly. But yeah, Tiny was very good to me, and that's how I came to understand about NSUs a little bit. I didn't have one then. I had too many other bikes already to look after, but that started my my interest. And this picture, yeah, this is not going my way here. This picture in an ad that is in German. that's the bike, the picture that started me on restoring the bike that I have now, the Supermax. And it does have shocks on the back. They made around 80,000 of those standard Maxes, and they only made about 12,000 of these Supermaxes because they started coming out in 1956, and by then the motorcycle market wasn't as hot as it was from 53 to 55. So anyway, I have one of these, and I have the first one, the first picture is a standard Max, and if I live long enough, I'm going to put that standard Max together too. This is what the bike looked like for about 30 years. I got this far with it, and then I moved on to having a daughter and working on other people's bikes to make money, and so it sat like this. This picture is when I first built the garage in 1988, and there wasn't a lot in it then. I had lots of room, but now I don't have room for anything again. This is the DuPont paint that I had for it, but 30 years later, I couldn't get the thinner for it. I had the, or the catalyst. I had the thinner, the reducer, but I couldn't get the catalyst. And I finally got some from California on eBay, and then I was able to paint what was left. There was 2 parts that hadn't been painted yet. And I couldn't get the paint anymore because you're not allowed to have that kind of paint now. So now this bike is one that I bought in the early 80s from a nuclear physicist in New Mexico. And he brought it up to Chicago, and I went to Chicago for something else. I can't remember what it was. And I picked it up and brought it home. And it turned out that this is a rare scrambler that they only made 230 of. And it was made just for somebody in the US who was saying they needed something like this. So I was pretty dumb. And 30 years ago, I bought this. It's Ziggy's fault, really, because Ziggy told me about Walnick's little newspaper with all the motorcycles for sale in it. There was no internet to get stuck on then. So I found this thing in Walnick's, and I bought it long distance, and I brought it home. But I always really wanted one that looked like the blue one in the picture. I really didn't want a scrambler, and I thought it was kind of ugly. And so then, this is the other side of it. Then I made a deal with a guy from Ontario who was a bit of a wheeler dealer, and he wanted a Gold Star Catalina basket case that I had and a Super Rocket. And they were real good bikes, but I needed some money to pay the mortgage off anyway, so I said, okay, I'll sell you those, but you have to bring me some NSUs, because there's no NSUs here and I want an NSU. So he loaded up his little Econoline van and he brought me the carcasses of a whole bunch of NSUs. And I let him have, the bikes that are, anyway. So then just by a stroke of luck, I found out that, because these forks are different on this than they were on all the other Supermaxes. These are the same as the Galanda Max, which was a factory dirt racer. So I got another one of these, but it was in pieces and it was missing some parts. So I used the engine from this and some of the other parts, but I didn't use the wheels or the fenders or the seat or the tank. I sold all the scrambler parts and the other scrambler pieces to a fellow who really wanted it in Ireland, and I shipped it by air. I got $1,000 for the whole thing, and it cost $1,000 for air freight. So all the scrambler stuff went, and the bike that I'm going to show you that I have, this contributed the core parts for it, but I didn't want a scrambler. I always wanted what I got. And now I would never do that today, but back then, there was no internet and no way to get an NSU. This is the original. I took a picture of this before I sent it away. No, actually, this is on my bike. I repainted this blue. So I took a picture of it for the color that the scrambler was, and I used this for the lining of the pinstriping on the case. This is what I did. This is it. I repainted it, and then I did the striping to match the original. I don't think my technology is very good here. It's just got away on me here. That's, yeah, well, there we go. Now it's working. That's the gas tank, and that I had, House of Silver did this for me, back when he was still alive.
Bob Duncan.
Yeah, Bob Duncan, and it sat all chrome and unpainted for 30 years, and then I had to find the catalyst for that paint, but it worked, and I got it done, and now it's on the bike. And this is the front brake, and it was kind of sloppy because it's a leading link fork, so every time it goes up and down, this is, and they had a place for a grease nipple, but it had never been drilled. It had no grease nipple in it, and the hole wasn't drilled through. But so I made a new bushing in my lathe with the groove in the middle and the hole, and I put a grease nipple in, and now it's never going to wear out. Oh, cool. So this is now, yeah, there's the headlight and the speedometer. That's a hell of a headlight. That was in the parts I got from Ontario, and I bought that new speedometer from Germany. And there's the bike. That's the same, but now it has all the street model Supermax parts coming together on it instead of a scrambler. I'm very stubborn. You can see on the floor here how many extra parts I had before I got enough to make one. And that gas tank cap says Weltmeister 19, well, you can read it. But anyway, they're bragging about their world championships in 53 and 54. And that's called a swan's neck tail light. This muffler is comes apart into 5 pieces. It comes apart into 5 pieces. There's a nut in the end of it, and you can take it all apart to clean it. There's the nut, you can see it. It comes apart in sections. The taillight is actually red glass. But yeah, the muffler comes apart into sections. So that was a lifesaver for me because it was all dented up. And I persuaded Bob Duncan to plate it all. And so now you can buy reproduction ones, but they don't come apart. They look like this, but they're all in one piece. And you can actually take the baffle out and clean all the carbon out of it if you want. It's meant to, you can leave it to your great grandkids, you know, that's how they made them then. It was going to last forever, right? That's better shot of the muffler there. You can see it comes apart here, and then the inside comes out as well. That's the other side of the bike. That's a letter that I got from a wonderful man in San Francisco. His name is Jay Richter, and he was the one who, in the United States, he had a little trailer and a car, and he went all over the United States with 2 NSUs on the back, trying to get dealers, and yeah, and he was just such a helpful man. He's passed away now, and yeah. He would do anything to help me. So I have to honor him. Yeah. Now, this is, I think this is going to work because I got my, yeah. This is what is one of the unique features about the engine in a Supermax or a Max. And they also use this in the little car and the Super Fox. And this is how the crankshaft drives the camshaft, the overhead camshaft. So early post-war, chains were not as reliable as high-speed devices as they are now. And bevel gears were very expensive to produce, and they made quite a bit of noise. This system is completely silent. There's no noise out of it at all. When these bikes run, they just go tuk, tuk, tuk. There's, in good condition, there's no mechanical noise. So this is, somebody's built a model, and this is how it works. It's completely silent, and the engine that I have has the Sportmax pieces in it, which are thicker, because when they were racing, they might over rev it, and the only thing that could give is if if it was way over rev, those rods might flex. So I got the stiffer ones. So don't challenge my NSU. Yeah. I'm not sure, but I think maybe I've used up my time. Well, I can talk forever about NSUs, but I don't think, probably not everybody here is as keen on it as I am. This NSU Ultramax camshaft drive system was uniquely applied to NSU vehicles. Nobody else used it. Mainly the NSU 250s, the 175 Maxi, the 125 Super Fox, and from 1952 to 63, approximately 160,000 motorcycles were made with this system. It was also used in the first NSU Prince 600 twin-cylinder cars, which Northwest Cycle also sold, by the way. That little picture of the NSU Prince was in the catalog, Northwest catalog. And all of this was attributed to the post-war designer was Alfred Roeder. He was an engineer, but he never had any university training. And he ended up being the director of several of the largest manufacturers in Germany. Some people are just talented. This is a picture of up close. Yeah, for me, I'm a gearhead, so I really love this stuff. But this whole assembly goes together like a Rubik's Cube. When you take it apart, there's only the 4 bolts down through to hold the whole assembly and the head down on the barrel. 4 big bolts. That's it. Everything else is fitted to tool and die standard, and they need 80,000 like that. And the pins that you push through the rock arms are just a nice slide fit with your fingers and thumb. You don't ever use anything to hit it. And so a bunch of pieces go together, and then a couple of things slide over the ends, and you put it down, and those 4 bolts go through, and that's it. And it's all made to very close tolerances. And in the ends of the rocker arms, the adjusters and the tips in the rocker arms are a ball with a flat on one side, so that there's never any side thrust on the valve in the guide. And also, the whole camshaft in the pillow blocks can tilt a few degrees either way. It had to, because as the cylinder and head expanded with the heat when it warmed up, the rods would bind up unless, so that was actually able to move back and forth just a little bit to accommodate the expansion and contraction in the cylinder and the cylinder head. It was a very complex design. And I still find it hard to believe they made so many of them, but they did. I think I better quit, because I can talk NSUs all night.
Thank you, Ray. That was awesome. Now, the one thing that you didn't mention, which you might want to consider doing, if you happen to have a catalog, or not, sorry, a calendar, take a look at the bike that follows it. Now, the NSU was the 50s, and over there is a Honda from the 60s. If you look at some of the design features in this Honda, they look almost identical to the 50s. Okay, sorry, I got it wrong.
No, he's got it right. But I, I tried to plan this, and the technology didn't quite work exactly the way I wanted. So, yeah, Soichiro Honda was an absolute fanatical Grand Prix motorcycle fan, right from the beginning. And I showed you some of the engines, and you can see when Honda got some money and he started racing later, NSU quit racing altogether in 1955. The top factory rider got killed in an accident, and the director said, "We've proven our point, 49 out of 51 entries, we won everything for 3 years. We don't need to ruin it for everybody. We proved our point. We go to Bonneville now, and we'll show them how to go the fastest, and that's it." Well, when you see the Hondas, and not just Honda, Kawasaki too, and some of the other Japanese makes, they looked NSU over pretty carefully. Those pressed steel frames worked well. The Sport Max that won a lot of races used that same frame. It had different brakes, and the engine was hopped up. You can still buy the Sport Max cam and piston. I'm thinking about it. I got too many other things to do, but after the war, just a bit like Venezuela now, you couldn't take currency out of Japan after the war because Japan was just totally destroyed after, and so the U.S. was helping them get started, and what happened was Mr. Honda, when he first started, was making little clip-on motors for people to put on bicycles because there was no transportation. It was desperately short in Japan. There was still a lot of gravel roads then, and so they gave each little startup fledgling manufacturer a couple of $1,000s worth of foreign currency credits because they couldn't take the yen out of the country. And the story that I got is that Soichiro Honda spent all of his money buying 3 of those early NSUs with the pressed steel frame. And if you look at the design of everything they made in the 60s, right up to the 754, on the mufflers on the 754, this muffler that I showed you the pictures of, I didn't show you the expanded pictures, but I do have them with me. It's an extractor silencer. So it actually produces more power than if you take it off or take the baffle out. It has a resonant effect. The first part of it is a megaphone, just like a race bike. And Honda was not dumb. He saw all this. And if you have a 750 Honda 4 or a 450 or a 350, and you look at yeah, that's to tell me to quit. If you have one and you look on the mufflers, there's printing embossed in it that says, removing the baffle or the muffler will result in a loss of power. And that design originated with NSU. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff. The brakes, yeah, the NSU, my bike, the ones that I showed you, the Supermax, has the air intake for the engine goes in through 2 holes in the pressed steel frame under the gas tank, and it goes through several channels with baffles so that all the pebbles and the dust gets knocked out, and then it goes through a micro paper air filter, which is unheard of on most of the bikes that I know of in the 50s. The oil pressure is like a garden hose, and it has a filter that takes out any particle that's a thousandth of a millimeter, which is less than 4/10 of a mil. Yeah, they really do last a long time. 50,000 kilometers is nothing without a rebuild. That's why they bought some of them in England. and used them for deliveries and people stole the brakes off them because they were better than a 650 Giant. And now I'm really gonna quit.
Awesome, thank you. Now, see, the cool thing for me was last summer when I got to see this, I at that point, I think, everyone thinks, German motorcycles, everyone goes BMW. Until that point, I had no idea there was multiple ones like that. Now, I learned so much, and thank you very much, Barry. I appreciate that. That was awesome. Again, thank you again.